Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. Today is a slightly weird stream for me that I didn't expect to be making because I've been streaming for the last 4 days straight. Not, of course, without any kind of interruption. I had smaller 1, 2, 3 hour streams throughout the week covering the Mac Mini, the MacBook Pro, the iMac being the least exciting out of the Macs that were introduced, and now the new M4 family of chips being expanded with M4 Pro, M4 Max Silicon. So a lot of great stuff to cover, and I did cover a lot of that. So my question was, well, when are we finally gonna see, finally, a day after the reveals, when are we finally going to see some actual benchmarks for that? When are we finally going to see some cool comparisons? And actually, we started getting some yesterday because probably a lot of those Macs are hitting the hands of reviewers. They're testing them out. They're running Geekbench, of course. So we are getting some data. Shout out to Jimmy James UK from Twitter, who compiles a lot of that data. He scrubs like the Geekbench database for all of it. We already have some people in the chat. I apologize for the very early stream. I do have some family plans in the evening, so this is why I don't expect like more than 10 people to watch today. But yeah, it's still cool to have you all. First, Max Maximus already leaving a generous $5.99 super chat saying, a welcome surprise to have you stream this early. Gonna use it for some fun distraction from working, lol. And yeah, those 4,000 plus results are crazy. Well, I guess you saw my thumbnail, or you probably already saw the news. Have fun working, don't get too distracted by me. Hopefully I'm just more like ASMR and not a distraction. Rosa saying, I'm very glad we're hitting 125k subs. True. The last few days definitely helped attract a lot of people, pushing us over 124. Prince so now we're saying you're already live. Yeah, always. The problem is that historically OBS has always had a small gap between hitting go live or just hitting the stream is starting, whatever, and then before the video actually starts. So sometimes I take like 3-5 seconds between hitting go live and actually like talking, because I have bad experiences with OBS. This will probably never get to go away in my head. I'm sorry. I was wondering if I can use my iPad Pro M4 has a display with a Mac M4 Mini. No, unfortunately the iPad is not supported as like a display input device in like a very easy way. There is some workaround. I've seen people use iPads as like monitors for their consoles and stuff like that, though I have never done that. Maybe you should look up a tutorial for something like that. Part of what I do on this channel is actually like being super honest about where my area of expertise lies, where my own personal experience lies. So use cases that I know about but I never really set up for myself, or that I just don't deem too useful for myself, those are the kind of use case I usually will not give you any recommendations for, because I also don't know just how good of an investment that is, right? I don't want to tell you, oh, get a Mac Mini, fully expect it to work with your iPad and whatever, and then you end up doing that, and then you're like, bro, it needs some crazy workarounds, it doesn't work half the time, what were you smoking when you told me that? I would be like, that's sorry, I guess I took that tutorial from YouTube the wrong way or something, right? And that's just not something I want to do. I want to be very honest with you guys. I want to give you my real impressions from my real world devices, which include like an iPhone 15 Pro Max, and then one iPad Pro, and then one Max MacBook Pro, an A15 Apple TV, an Apple Watch Ultra 2, so my AirPods Pro 2. So I do have my own personal ecosystem, and I do of course know a lot about what you can do inside the Apple ecosystem across all kinds of different products, but I'm not trying to claim to be an expert on absolutely every product and absolutely every solution, like be it in software or hardware, that Apple has ever designed. For that, you should probably consult not a single YouTuber, but just like a wide array of different voices in the tech community, sites, everything from like The Verge and Gadget, A lot of fun stuff sometimes comes from GSM Arena, especially when it comes to quick benchmark data for like new smartphones. So there's a lot of insight that you can get if you're really willing to do the research. Now, before we fully start, cheers. And a small shout out to do all the YouTube jazz, as we call it around here, which is subscribing to the channel, liking the video, sharing it out to anybody who you think might enjoy it. Comment. I love me a lively live chat. I love interacting with you guys. You see, I read your chat messages, be they super chat or not, unless there are too many people watching, but I don't think that will be a problem today given the timing of the stream. And of course, you can do that direct support through super chats or stickers. You can become a channel member right here on YouTube. Shout out to Max, Maximus, Angelica, and Steve, who are all Marktech Pro Max supporters right here on YouTube. Or you can become a supporter over on Patreon. Thank you so much. Of course, just watching the videos, hitting the like button, and just becoming part of the community in some way, even if it's Twitter, even if it's just like subscribing to the free Patreon tier and contacting me over there. It's all very welcome, believe me. And the last few days have been absolutely amazing for myself, for the channel. I know a lot of you have helped each other out in the live chat, so that's great. And a small warning, my meme of a cousin is currently in the decorating mood, which means she's gonna exchange Halloween decoration for Christmas decoration. Yes, you heard it right, so there might be some sounds around me, or maybe she'll even come in, but just as a warning. So cheers, and let's get started. So, the crazy stuff today, let's get right into it. Let's not mince words. This is a 16-inch MacBook Pro featuring the M4 Max processor. The beast with 12 performance cores, 4 efficiency cores, built on the N3E node, featuring 8533 memory, up to 128 gigabytes of it, on a 512-bit bus. And yes, those are the results we're seeing. This is the first consumer chip without any crazy liquid nitrogen overclocking or shit like that, which is completely meaningless because you cannot sustain that performance in the system. It's just completely unstable. Hitting over 4,000 points in single core Geekbench, and my predictions of around 25,000 points in multi-core are completely shattered. Some might say, well, not by that much, but going beyond any point is just eating potentially so much power and creating extra heat. I'm kind of not worried, but I'm wondering how Apple will cool it well. So yeah, 26,675, almost 27,000 points in Geekbench 6. This is a phenomenal processor. And don't forget, this is a laptop. Now, I'm not saying the Mac Studio that will inevitably get this processor will actually perform any faster. It will just have an easier time sustaining all that crazy performance. But we are looking at performance beyond AMD's latest desktop chip, which, let me find it here. This is the AMD Ryzen 9 9950X, their latest Zen 5 16-core chip, considering it consists of 2 dies having each 8 CPU cores. There's also an I/O die. So it's a design optimized to actually reduce cost and improve yields. Apple's chip is a crazy 100 billion processor on one die, and every single part is N3E, be it the CPU, the GPU, the neural engine, and everything. And so we get 3,400 points. You can probably get it to around 3,700 in tests where you overclock it. However, I've talked about that with people online, and I watched a lot of videos, and that is that if you try to overclock Ryzen in a way that actually works, you would need to have like a golden sample chip plus a golden sample motherboard with memory where you can actually maybe plug in like beyond 6400 mega transfers memory, right? So this is the speed of the Ryzen 9950X. Maybe 3500 can be seen kind of as the top. 22,000 is actually kind of some of the highest results without overclocking that I've seen. Maybe 23K. So Apple with 16 cores, out of which 12 are efficiency, 12 are performance, but 4 are efficiency cores, in a laptop is beating across the board in both single and multi-core performance AMD's latest desktop chip that is basically optimized to spread its heat, to have as many cores as possible. All 16 cores are P cores here, and this is just the CPU. It doesn't have to share bandwidth with a GPU. It doesn't have to give up heat to also have a GPU on the die. It has the I/O die for the extra stuff, even that is on 6 nanometers, so they can even save money, right? And it beats it comprehensively. And I just want to know just how much less power it consumes in multi-core, while giving you like almost 20% uptick in multi-core performance. We have more people joining the chat. Mr. George Best saying, "Hey there, Mark. Hope you're doing well. Been a while. I'm sorry I was busy with my exams." I fully understand that. Not too long ago I was busy with my own. Still have some oral stuff and practical stuff as exams before I'm a full-on dermatologist. So yeah, I absolutely understand. I do follow you on X though, and I appreciate your insights on Macs in general. Yeah, this is something that has been funny in my community. Like, the iPhone is so much larger than the Mac, and the iPad is probably somewhere in between when it comes to actual sales numbers. But somehow I have become more of like a Mac and iPad streamer than the iPhone. Like, my Mac videos outperform my iPhone videos usually by a lot, at least when you compare like the same year. Of course, I have grown from last year, so my iPhone 16 videos outperformed like my M3 Mac videos to the most degree, though I had like a crazy 50K video last year. Don't know how that happened. So yeah, I'm really glad to have some people who might have been even OGs, maybe when the channel was way smaller, and now they're like rediscovering the channel after some stuff changed in their lives and things like that. So very, very happy. I actually recognize your name, Mr. George Best. I always thought you were Mr. George Beat, but that's probably just my brain misfiring a little. So thank you so much. Zopoito, also long-term viewer of the channel. Winking High, Winking High back. Winking. No, Winking is that. I'm sorry, I'm just too Germanized in the last couple of days. It's because Winken is in German something different. So high back is basically what I'm trying to say. And Angelica saying it's great that I'm finding the time, and she's also giving a shout out to the 125k community at this point. Thank you all so much for being part of this community, for helping grow this community. Guys, we're actually over 20 people watching, which I never expected given the time of the day. Please hit the like button, help us attract more people, help us get to 25 or 30 viewers. It would be absolutely insane given the time of day that I'm streaming, and given that the main news have kind of passed, but help us grow this, make this happen, get us to 15 likes or something like that at the very least. To be honest, I love my Mac and iPhone so much, whereas my iPad is just a Netflix machine. However, it is still usable, isn't it? This is what I'm trying to tell people. Like, look, the Macs give you like crazy result potentially. Like, don't get me wrong, I myself have an M1 Max MacBook Pro, the fastest M1 chip that was available, right? And now I could go even crazier. I would add basically over 50% of single core performance over my M1 Max. But still, my go-to device for a lot of my daily workflow, including some work stuff, is actually my M1 iPad Pro. It is plenty fast. Even 8 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of storage is still plenty, given that I have 5G. So I'm basically constantly connected to the internet. And I do have an unlimited contract that I share between my iPhone and my iPad. Germany actually has some pretty great contracts in that regard. So yeah, while I understand that, for example, for many people, the iPad just becomes a Netflix machine, And some of us use Netflix a lot, like Crunchyroll, Prime Video, all the Apple TV Plus, right? It's not bad to have a Netflix machine in a way. Maybe you can argue, oh, well, I overpay given that it's like a Netflix machine, but having it potentially down the road, like a portable tandem OLED screen that is perfect for reading, for videos, gives you amazing HDR, great efficiency, so it actually lasts an absurdly long period of time if you're just watching a video or something like that. If you want to play some music even while you're like on the toilet or something like that, I never like discouraging the iPad because it's such a fun, such a personal product to me. So even if you go back on the channel, like one of my first videos that even got close to like 1,000 views was actually like my defense of the M2 iPad Pro, because people were saying like, oh, it's not sufficiently improved over the M1 or something like that, and I'm like, look, it's better, right? Like newer Wi-Fi spec, like faster chip. What is there to, at the same price, what is there to complain about, right? So yeah, again, I fully understand what you're getting at, but I'm just trying to be more positive about the iPad in general. It's just that unfortunately Apple hasn't given us that much to talk with the iPad. Even though, of course, they did announce the crazy M4 iPad Pro with a tandem OLED screen and stuff like that. I just wish that more of their software focus, and I don't mean bring macOS to the iPad. I'm not Drew from Telosive Tech. But I wish they had done something this year that made us talk about the iPad more, because Apple Intelligence is across all devices. And you know which devices actually got an increase in memory for Apple Intelligence? Well, it's the iPad mini, it's the iPhone 16 versus the iPhone 15, and then now all Macs actually doubled from 8 to 16 gigabytes. We'd never got something like that on the iPad, and in my opinion, it's kind of like before the holiday season. In my opinion, Apple should do something like that to encourage like iPad Pro sales. So like, oh, every iPad Pro comes now either with 512 gigs of storage or 16 gigs of memory or something like that. This is why this channel loves covering iPad, but doesn't do it quite as much as I would actually like to. After finishing school, I don't seem to do anything more on the iPad than watching Netflix. Yeah, hopefully I can use it for editing images. Yes, all my thumbnails usually are created in Pixelmator. So the more basic ones are just done sometimes on the iPhone while I'm in the bathroom. Some of them are done on my iPad when I need the Apple Pencil for like a more accurate selection rather than just like subject lift in the Photos app. So yeah, the iPad is still great for me. To be honest, with the iPad Pro M4, the honestly best thing that got updated was the screen, and to be honest, I didn't see a major difference. That is the point though. Like mini LED is still great. Like tandem OLED, it will avoid blooming. It's pixel by pixel perfect, right? So HDR is even more precise. It's a big improvement for reading, especially if you're reading white text on a black background. That's improved. But yeah, like a big part why I didn't upgrade is because yes, my mini LED iPad Pro with like over 2,000 local dimming zones, which is 4 times more than the Pro Display XDR at 32 inches, is still doing great for me. Yeah, absolutely understand. So let us though get back to the Macs, and if anybody's old enough to remember back to the Mac when it comes to like the designing of the MacBook Air and how it combined ideas from the iPad, give a shout out to that if you're such a nerd as I am. So 4,060 points, 26,700 in multi-core. These are all results coming right now, of course, from kind of early samples. This is the highest that I've seen thus far, but I haven't seen too much, to be honest. I mean, we can, I guess, now that I've already shown you like the 9950X results here, I mean, we can look, yeah, you can see you have to kind of manually scrap the database. You cannot search here. So again, thank you for people like Jimmy James UK on Twitter doing that kind of stuff, and then including me with like Vadim Yurev from MaxTech in your shout outs, because it helps a lot with what I'm doing here. Let's actually look at the previous generation. So you can see, by the way, that some of the naming has changed, which is a bit unfortunate. So if you actually want to compare like which Mac was last gen, like 0.5 or 0.7 or 0.11, it seems to be not perfectly one-to-one. Some of them are, so I'm trying to refrain from saying, oh, this is exactly that Mac. I mean, it's easy to say with the MacBook Pro with the M1 Max chip, because obviously the Mac Mini didn't get the Max chip. But with some Pro results, I couldn't tell you, maybe some of them are the Mac Mini. Of course, if you see like a result that has 64 gigabytes of memory on an M4 Pro, that's the Mac Mini, because the MacBook Pros with M4 didn't get more than 48 gigabytes of memory. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff to consider early on. Can I just look for the M3 Max, please? Because basically all M3 chips gave you around 3100 points here, clocked at 4.05 gigahertz. Now, of course, that's an interesting actual thing. This does suggest to me that Apple is ever so slightly chasing benchmark scores. Now, this is also, by the way, the highest end config at 128 gigabytes. So this machine is absolutely bonkers, but it does clock at 4.5 gigahertz. And what's also interesting, I thought maybe that would be like a performance mode or something like that. But no, the M4 Pro also seemingly gets 4.5 gigahertz. So this seems to be an upgrade over the quote-unquote regular M4 at 4.4 gigahertz, and of course the A18 Pro, which has the same main big core, clocked at around between 4 and 4.1 gigahertz. So Apple did still increase clock speeds. Not as crazy as they could have. Like, I mean, they could have given you like at least 200 megahertz, I guess. But probably they were trying to show off and getting to this. I'm not saying that Apple is as obsessed with Geekbench as we are. And I know some people will come in with accusations of like, oh, Apple Bench, right? Don't forget, Cinebench 2024 gives you the same like 15, 20, sometimes 20% improvements of M4 versus like AMD Zen 5 chips, Intel's Aero and Lunar Lake processors, right? So this idea that Geekbench is somehow unique, you can argue that Geekbench really shows off Apple's chips in multi-core, but that's because it works differently than Cinebench. It's not because it's designed to make Apple's chips better. It's because it's designed to really like replicate, like potentially using several apps, popular apps and stuff like that, while Cinebench is just like, oh, it's one brute force approach for one specific task, maybe even not as fully optimized of like Apple's combination of P and E cores the same way it might be on x86 chips. So in single core, I have to absolutely disagree. Apple smokes, I don't know what happened with my voice, smokes the competition in Spec 2017, in Cinebench 2024, and in Geekbench. So Geekbench is no outlier here. In multi-core, Geekbench is a bit of an outlier, but I have also not seen Spec 2017 multi-core tests, so it's just Cinebench. And Cinebench, again, it does have the history of Intel and AMD really trying to optimize their chip specifically for the latest version of Cinebench. Even for the last version of Cinebench, actually. And that's because a lot of reviewers on the Windows side will often run like the last version of Cinebench, even though it's objectively outdated, right? It represents an older version of Cinema 4D, which no professional right now using Cinema 4D would work on it in a way that more replicates Cinebench R23 than it does Cinebench 2024. But like, I guess some Windows reviewers maybe are a little lazy in that regard, or they just think, oh, it's still valuable insight. So they will sometimes give you both Cinebench R23 and 2024 results. And of course, if you look at Cinebench R23, that version, which was completely unoptimized, it was basically optimized enough to run stably on Apple Silicon Macs, but not to actually get anywhere near to the performance maximum that those chips could give you. And now that Cinebench 2024 is closer to that, it's still not fully there. And now that Apple's chips are getting results in the 170 range, I assume this chip with even a slightly higher clock speed will give you 180, and the rest is in the 145 to maybe 155 range. Yeah, of course Apple can show off that stuff. Mr. George Best saying, I'm honestly surprised Apple is shipping some RAM configs as factors of 6 instead of 2. Like 48 gigabytes of RAM, they're using the same 6 gigabyte modules found in the iPad M4, because I remember the iPads had 4 gigs disabled. Yeah, it's a logistic thing. I try not to think too much about that stuff. Again, I'm still angry that the iPad Pro didn't get 12 gigs of RAM as standard, or at that point just make it 16. If you can give it to the $1,000 M2 MacBook Air, you can make 16 gigabytes of RAM standard, do it for the freaking tandem OLED iPad Pro, where the 13-inch version costs an exorbitant $1,300. And don't forget, those are the people who are also going to buy very expensive Magic Keyboards, pretty expensive Apple Pencils, potentially folio covers and stuff like that. All that market that doesn't really exist for Macs, right? You still get all that extra profit. Plus, the iPad is still a mostly closed-down system, so your revenue from the App Store from the iPad is higher than it is from any Mac on the Mac App Store, unless, of course, people buy Final Cut Pro for $300 left and right. But most people are just running a very old license of Final Cut at this point. Guys, we have 25 people watching. Thank you so much for tuning in at this weird time of day to discuss with me some very nerdy stuff. I love you all so much. Please hit the like button, help us get to 15 likes, even 20 likes, so that we can help attract even more people, so that we can grow the community, we can make this live chat even more livelier. All support is very much appreciated. So, of course, I showed you here the M1, this is the M1 Pro, the M3 Pro iPad, the M3 Pro MacBook Pro 16-inch. I so apologize. There's just so many devices to keep in mind, so many names between Pro chips and Pro devices and Macs, and I apologize. There could be some stuff, in my opinion, that could be simplified, but I guess every chip, every device needs its own branding in a way. Randy Man saying, sure, no problem. I assume you mean leaving a like is no problem. Just ordered a 16-inch M4 Pro. Yeah, you just wrote 26-inch, but which would be cool. I assume some pros would still be enticed by that if it maybe was a foldable, right, or something like that, like an 18-inch screen that unfolds into 26 or something crazy like that, and it then becomes a 4x3 screen, which is perfect for IMAX video testing or shit like that. Here's the M3 Pro. Where did I open the M3 Max? Here's the M3 Max, around 3200 in single core, usually closer to 3100 actually, and 21,000 multi-core. So you can see the huge uplift of 5,500, well, actually 5,700 points in multi-core. The uplift in single core is absolutely phenomenal. Let's just even be generous, and let's calculate it 4,000 divided by around 3,200. That's a 25% increase. I know some people will come in and talk about, oh look, but the IPC gains only 8 or 9% at best, because you still have the improvements of clock speeds, plus the improvements of support for scalable matrix extensions as part of ARMv9. Apple is basically cheating. Geekbench 6.3 did all that stuff to specifically help Apple. that's all bullshit. Like Geekbench also benefits from like better AVX supports for like AVX 512. So they periodically add tech that they believe is representative of certain newer workflows. And when you actually look at how Apple leverages SME, I've heard some engineers talk about that. Apple is using AI across the board. They're using their AMX accelerators on the CPU to help the neural engine and stuff like that. So Apple does not put shit into their processors that they don't believe cannot be used. That's because Apple has a very tight budget. They like their profits. They will spend a lot of money on a processor, on making it, on developing it and stuff like that, if they know they can get something back out of it. And just doing some benchmark chasing is not really something Apple does, because it doesn't really help Apple. They don't compete with on for example, Cyberpunk 2077 is coming out early next year for Macs. Like Apple could potentially outperform similar like any device that runs at a similar wattage, right? But fundamentally Apple knows that with enough wattage, like the desktop chips designed to run in huge towers with active cooling, sometimes even water cooling. Some people might use liquid metal like cooling stuff on it. Like Apple knows, at some point of course this gen will be beaten, but we might as well give you a very nice big result that is actually usable, and then we will get results from like people who transition to Apple Silicon and are like, that Mac might even be beyond 50% faster in some tests that I run, in some professional apps that I need, in Apple's own apps, right? And that is the power of course, controlling the hardware, the software, the firmware, everything that like Intel by itself doesn't have, AMD by itself doesn't have, Windows by itself doesn't have. We have seen Windows like go from like Wintel, right? That long-term collaboration between Microsoft and Intel to make sure that Intel has like great drivers and stability on Windows, to then use some AMD chips in their devices, to now have of course like this focus on Qualcomm's XLE chips, right? This is not the kind of like there is freedom there, right? Of course you can choose like which company to support or something like that, while with Apple you buy Apple and whoever like builds like their memory and storage and displays or whatever, right? But you don't get to choose. So Apple doesn't try to really do that benchmark chasing, nor are benchmark makers interested in making Apple artificially look good, because if that comes out, that will be the end of that benchmark. I really don't understand some of the conspiracy theories. Azan, is it worth getting an M4 MacBook Pro for ML? Machine learning? Is that what you're asking? Or because ML stands for a few things. If you're like a machine learning, like an AI engineer, you're probably looking at a larger chip here. I would say like an M4 Pro. M4 Max can be overkill. They all share the same neural engine, but you just get that extra bandwidth from M4 Pro, the beefier GPU, the extra CPU cores that are almost as good as the M4 Max, depending on which configuration you get. You even get the slight single core boost. So if that's what you mean, that would be my recommendation. So, but we are not anywhere close to finish, because after the CPU comes the GPU. And the GPU here is impressive, though it's not quite as crazy, which is funny because with single core, we've actually talked about like a 25% improvement, maybe even like, I guess 28, right? If you like take the highest single core and some of the low like for M4 and some of the lower ones for M3. But let's just say 25%. When we actually look at where is it? Do they not have it here? My God. So let's look at Geekbench 6 GPU. So we have around, I guess the highest point was kind of 160K. So if we actually look at that, let's say 192 divided by, I mean, it's a pretty easy calculation. It's a 20% improvement, but I'm just still going to type it out. It's a 1.2x improvement in Geekbench 6 compute test. That does not mean it's perfectly representative of course, every game you're going to play. It's we did not have like a huge change in the amount of graphics cores or anything, so it's mostly benefiting from the higher bandwidth and the slightly redesigned architecture. But the GPU improvement is actually not bad in my opinion. 20% more GPU over the M3, considering that the M3 was a small but still meaningful upgrade over the M2, considering the fact that it did support stuff like hardware accelerated ray tracing, newer features like mesh shading. It had a new what is it, like a new timer or like whatever. Basically it was more efficient at distributing tasks. It had dynamic caching and stuff like that. Like I would have liked a bit more, to be honest, but yeah, I had also hoped to get like an M4 Max with like 48 cores, right? Alas, Apple still kept to 40 cores, unfortunately. How many teraflops is M4 Max predicted at FP32? I actually don't know. I don't know what it's clocked at, if there's any meaningful changes. We have the CPU core clocks, but not the GPU cores. So I couldn't tell you right now. I would just, to be honest, I would probably just assume it's 10 to 20% more than the old M3 Max and M3 Pro. No, with M3 Pro the improvement should be bigger, because we also go from 18 cores tops to 20, while on the M4 Max the core counts are the same to the M3 Max, both binned and unbinned. So it really would depend on the clock speed improvements on the M4 Max. The M3 Max also gets like the extra cores. 20 teraflops, you hope. Well, I always have to say though, never count on teraflops as like a meaningful metric of anything, especially as the architecture changes. Because for one thing, Apple did promise us like double the ray tracing performance here, right? And if you were just looking at teraflops, you would be like, oh, where does this huge improvement come from? Well, that's because it's a new architecture with a newer RT engine, right? Or it can be vice versa, right? What about dual issue FP32, for example, as it came out on RTX 3000, where they doubled the teraflop count, right? But the performance increased basically in lockstep with the amount of extra cores or the amount of extra clock speed or the faster memory, and not with the teraflop count, which just magically just jumped through the roof. Now, I'm not saying that you will see a similar discrepancy from Apple, though at some point I do assume Apple will use dual issue FP32. They will claim a doubling of teraflops. The reason why I think they will do that is because down the road, now AMD has that too, Nvidia has it too. Whenever there's a teraflop comparison, Apple loses. So I think they will just want to do that. Maybe some developers will be able to leverage it for like some extra 10-15% improvements. But yeah, like teraflops by themselves are not that meaningful. Plus here, the bandwidth is actually much more meaningful, especially on the M4 Pro, where versus the M3 Pro, you get like a 75% increase in total memory bandwidth. I mainly look at that for AI inference besides memory bandwidth. Take the 4090 at 80 to 100 teraflops. Yeah. I mean, even with AI though, it is dependent on what workflow you have, right? And that actually brings us to another test. If I can actually find it here. and that is the Geekbench score here for Geekbench AI. Well, yeah, if it is Geekbench, it's Geekbench AI. And here you have some results. This is, I believe, just for the neural engine, so the results will be pretty much in line what you get with the A18 Pro, just a bit higher. It seems to be a little higher clocked. Like this, I believe on the A18 Pro gives you like about 45k or something like that. Though I've seen even tests like 47 or something like that. So maybe it's not even that much higher clocked. But yeah, this is also a newer neural engine. So if you're looking at faster AI tasks, don't forget both M4's P-cores and E-cores have newer machine learning accelerators, Apple's AMX, right? The GPU itself is a newer architecture that seems to be pretty good at compute, regardless of what happens with teraflops. There is the bandwidth increase, which you cannot put down in teraflops. And you have a new neural engine that is specifically now built for integer 8 compute. So depending on what you do, all those things working together could potentially give you huge uplifts. But one thing that I actually disliked from Apple's promises on their own website was like sometimes they will talk about like, well, the neural engine is 3 times faster than M1, and here's an AI task running 60% faster, and I'm like, what? Why is there like a 60%? Why is there like a 2x discrepancy between the results, right? Between what you promised for the neural engine itself and for this AI task. Even the GPU itself has gotten a bigger uplift over the years. So some specific tests might be bottlenecked in some ways. Some specific tests might be like really crazily using the entire SoC with CPU acceleration, GPU acceleration, leveraging the latest neural engine capabilities. So you're saying you're working with large LLM tokens, and yeah, of course, here you have also, of course, the benefit of unified memory. So if you're actually working with really large stuff, maybe it's worth even for you to get something in the 128 gigabyte range, or at least 64. Yeah, so there's a lot to consider here. Very impressive to think it's in a little chip that's power efficient. Absolutely. And I would also give a shout out here to actually the M4 Pro, which is the next chip we're going to talk about. Because don't forget, the M4 Pro has the exact same architecture advantages as the M4 Max. It has the same neural engine, even with the same like core amount. So you're really only cutting down the potential for having 2 extra P cores, and which actually deliver quite a nice increase in multi-core results. I usually like those results at basically like what, 4,000 points in multi-core. That's like each core running at half its maximum speed. That's very impressive once you get to 12 cores. Usually they're very diminishing returns. Sometimes you're getting only like 30 or even like just 25% of one core's top speeds once you add another core and another core and another core. This is why like server chips run at like half the clock speeds by default of like the desktop parts. By clocking down each core, they can make sure that there is like no master core that already consumes so much power and generates so much heat that the other cores now wouldn't have the necessary bandwidth and the extra thermal overhead to run. And Apple is like, oh, here you go. Here are 2 extra P cores, and they're basically equate to 1 extra full speed P core, which is quite impressive. Then you have the single core result of almost 4,000. It's still clocked though at 4.5 gigahertz, actually 4.51 gigahertz. So we can discuss if that means it will not reach 4,000, though I would also argue at that point the difference between 3925 and 4060 is pretty meaningless for most people. Schnitzel Noodle, my German viewer, my new German viewer joining the chat, welcome. Those cores beat every x86 chip currently available. Exactly, this is why I showed off the Ryzen 9 9950X, which maybe the 9950X 3D Well, it probably won't boost single core performance too much in a test like Geekbench. That's not where the 3D Vcache gives you benefits. But now that you can actually overclock, and I mean real overclock, not the crazy liquid nitrogen stuff, but just like a slight 10% or something, 5% even, overclock on 3D Vcache, maybe you can go beyond 22K on that. So at least it will beat the M4 Pro. I still don't think it will beat the M4 Max, which is crazy considering we would be talking about 16 performance cores optimized for desktop workflows, sitting on 2 die, so the heat distribution can be much better and stuff like that, which could actually allow them to clock each individual core higher. So yeah, Apple's results here are super duper crazy. Gonna wait for the M4 Ultra, might grab a maxed out M4 Pro while I wait. That absolutely makes sense. If you have like a desktop workflow, right, and maybe you would want something crazy like 256 gigabytes of unified memory on M4 Ultra, which I assume is something that Marques for like MKBHD's channel will get. Yeah, if you can afford it and you know you can leverage it for your work, I actually think that's a killer combo. I hope Apple acknowledges their strengths in terms of AI because of their unified memory architecture. Yeah, just today, like Moore's Law is dead posted like that Strix Halo will be coming early next year. It's still unfortunately running, and it will have like 16P cores, but it will be like for laptops. Right, so it will not be, unfortunately, one die, everything built on the latest node or something like that. I think it's still going to be RDNA 3.5 rather than RDNA 4, which is going to be a big bummer for everyone who wants to use it for AI acceleration, because apparently RDNA 4 is much better at AI acceleration, but that is going to support 128 gigabytes. I believe it is going to be over a 256-bit bus. And it's going to be 8533 memory, so it will beat the M4 Pro in GPU performance, especially since it will have about as many GPU cores as the M4 Max. But like, I still think Apple will be the efficiency king. Plus, apparently 128 gigabytes for Strix Halo is only coming out sometime later, like next year. So until that's actually happening, and then there's also the question, well, how good will Windows be actually able to leverage an SoC? Because for Apple with unified memory, all memory is always available for both the CPU and the GPU, right? On Windows with SoCs, you will sometimes have to go back to the BIOS and actually make sure that the GPU can fully leverage all that stuff. LLMs in a consumer way, NVIDIA are too cringe with lack of VRAM. Yeah, it is, like, I believe they will have like an RTX 4090 mobile, which will basically be an they will have an RTX 5090 mobile, which will basically be an RTX 5080 desktop, and it will use higher density 3 gigabyte modules of DDR7 memory. So that will allow it to have on a 256-bit bus 24 gigabytes of, what would it be, like 32 gigabytes per second memory. So that could be, but it's still like, it will be 24, and Apple on the M4 Pro gives you easily like 48, and on the Mac Mini even 64. So if you are more limited by RAM than everything else at some point, you don't even care that much about raw performance, you just care about getting rid of that memory bottleneck. And Mr. Barry, the M4 Pro chips on Geekbench 6 are all from laptops with 48 gigs of memory. Yeah, there is no 64 gigs of memory on the MacBook Pros. That's only for the Mac Mini. I think Apple is basically just saying, if you want more memory, get the extra performance of the M4 Max with that. Pedro Pacha, I don't know what you're saying between M3 Pro or M4 because I don't know if you're asking me or like one of the previous chatters. Mr. Barry, also only 14 cores for the M4 Pro, not 12 cores out yet on Geekbench 6. No. Oh, you mean like there's no like bin down model? Yeah, but I don't care about that because we are talking about the peak results. Of course, yeah, I would expect, for example, like the binned version here to deliver probably like 18 to 19,000 results, given what we saw from what 2 extra P cores do on the M4 Max. Could be as high as 19.5, could be as low as 18K if Apple decides to really create a noticeable difference. Maybe make the chip overall also more efficient by running more cores at lower clock speeds. We are still missing, of course, some pieces of the pie. Schnitzel Noodle, finally ordering my first Mac yesterday, a Mac Mini with M4 Pro, 14 cores, 1420, so that's 10 P cores, 4 E cores, the full 20 GPU cores, 64 gigs of memory, so the full shabam. I guess that's because the upgrade between 48 gigabytes, we discussed this yesterday, right? The upgrade from 48 gigabytes to 64 gigabytes is $200. So it's half the price per gigabyte of RAM as it is to upgrade from 16 to 24, because there you get 8 gigabytes for $200. And when you go from 48 to 64, you get 16 gigabytes for $200. You get 2 terabytes of storage. Nice. Again, it's a Mac Mini. Very easy way to add extra storage. Just have always enough to keep your most relevant, most up-to-date tasks on it, and you're golden. 2 weeks of anticipation, cannot wait. Well, congratulations, brother. I'm waiting on my PS5 Pro. I know that's a different kind of Pro. I just had my credit card like book like $800 away, so I hope I really get it on day one on November 7th. Until then, we also have like the crazy US election, which drives me insane. I hope we finally get that over us. So there's a lot. Congrats. Don't get me wrong, you with the Asian name, you were Oni-chan, right? Because it is flowing in my head now, because I know that somebody like that joined, but then we had other people with like Chinese or Japanese characters or Korean characters. For all I know, I apologize, I'm not versed in those languages, join. So at that point I'm getting confused who is who. I apologize. When do you think they'll announce the M4 Ultra and Mac Studio? Well, they will have a... This is what bothers me, because according to Mark Gurman, the Mac Studio is coming out in the first half of next year, but the Mac Pro is coming out in the second half of next year. So would Apple announce a Mac Studio without the optional M4 Ultra chip, and then like 2 or 3 or 4 months after that announce an M4 Pro that has only the M4 Ultra, right? Like, that would make the M4 Ultra Mac Pro announcement such a bummer. Like, that would be like the first Mac basically coming in here without a new chip, right? The iMac was the first Mac to get the M4, even though of course it was already on the iPad Pro. Now the Mac Mini has introduced the M4 Pro. The MacBook Pro introduced the M4 Max. The MacBook Air is the cheaper device. It doesn't need to introduce a new chip. It just needs to show that it's improving. And then the Mac Studio would potentially introduce the Ultra, and then the Pro, and then the Mac Pro would take even longer, but still have the same chip? That's so weird. Like, I honestly couldn't tell you. But yeah, the M4 Ultra will be better than the RTX 4090. It's just at that point we will have the RTX 5090 and 5080. And they will use them for their AI servers. I've actually made that argument yesterday on Twitter, which I said that private cloud compute is actually potentially a godsend for consumers. And the reason for that is that because, well, Apple's AI needs will increase, so they will have fewer reasons to keep around a generation once it's like for consumers, once it stops selling too well, right? Consider the M4 is getting into like its 12, 14, 16-month period, right? And historically, Apple would like cling to the idea, oh man, we have to sell out of many as possible. Let's clear out inventory, right? Let's offer some discounts through third-party resellers or something like that. So when we actually introduce M5, the M4s are actually out the door, right? So that they don't compete in stores with each other, not our stores, but like tech shops and stuff like that. And now with private cloud compute, Apple could just say, you know what, we can order as many chips from TSMC as we like. If we see that, people aren't buying this specific Mac or this specific configuration, right, we can still keep ordering those chips and then just pushing them into private cloud compute. And that, and for consumers, we can more quickly accelerate the coming of a new generation. I think that could be quite like a good thing for consumers down the road. Plus, Apple will actually be in the future be able to have even higher mass orders from TSMC. Plus, they will be able to longer leverage older nodes. And that brings me to a rumor that I would just like to mention because there aren't too many details. And that is coming from Min-Chi Kuo, who is saying that Apple is working on their own Wi-Fi 7 chip, and it is actually going to be quite an advanced one, and it will actually come in the iPhone 17. Now, he's still saying that it's at least one iPhone 17 model, so it might still be the iPhone 17 Air. Could be more if the chip does really well in testing. I guess Apple still would have some orders from Broadcom to fulfill. So if they ordered Wi-Fi 7 modules for like the iPhone 17 Pro, they wouldn't just leave them on the table, or they would just cancel the order. That comes with financial penalties. It's a logistical nightmare. It doesn't make financial sense. But if it performs well, they could potentially maybe expand it from just the iPhone 17 Air to also the base model, or to the Pro models and do something completely different on the base models. But I'm not sure how Apple's current Wi-Fi 7 stuff compares to what Broadcom is doing. For now, they're using Wi-Fi and Broadcom chips supplied by Broadcom across nearly all products. They're planning to switch to their own solutions. The first one is going to be a Wi-Fi 7 plus Bluetooth spec, Bluetooth chip. I actually wonder if it is going to be Bluetooth 6.0. Like, Bluetooth 6.0 is not a huge improvement over 5.0. Right, but it is a relevant new standard that at some point Apple will adopt, right? So, it just has been finalized like 2 months ago. So, I guess it would make sense for a chip coming like late next year to have that. I believe Qualcomm is saying that the 8 Elite is already compliant with Bluetooth 6.0 needs. Sometimes those improvements don't actually need new hardware. We've seen Apple in the past update their Bluetooth specifications via firmware updates. If they're going to do this right now with this generation, I don't know. They might just want to wait for their own modem to just also make it artificially better versus previous Broadcom solutions. And one part of that, according to Min-Chi Kuo, is actually that it will support the latest Wi-Fi 7 spec, and it will be manufactured on TSMC's 7 nanometer node. Now, I don't actually know too much how that compares with current Broadcom Wi-Fi chips. The original rumor for those modems was that a big part of Apple's focus would be efficiency. So, and modems are usually a node or even 2 behind, but it's just a little weird to be getting a 7 nanometer node while we are getting close to 2 nanometer on the chip side. So I don't know how that will exactly play out. Maybe this is their first generation version, right? They just tested everything everything on 7 nanometer. It's very tried and true, right? And maybe this really isn't designed for like Apple's Pro models or anything like that. Maybe Broadcom will still have a better solution for Apple in that regard. So maybe they will just use that in the cheaper models, maybe not even give it the full speed possible to keep it more in the efficiency range. And after that, maybe a year later, they can still use that modem, maybe for Macs, which of course have much larger batteries, much larger antennas, better cooling system. And then iPhones could potentially get something manufactured on TSMC's 5 or 4 nanometer node. So in the era of like chip development, we are actually like in a very, very exciting phase for Apple, because Apple is of course designing Apple Silicon from AirPods Pro chips inside, like the H2, to what will hopefully next year will be an H3 with like even better stuff. Now their own modems apparently, and their own 5G chips, which are rumored to come to the iPhone SE, and there was a rumor that it would come to the iPhone 17 Air. Maybe that iPhone 17 Air is like Apple's prototype for everything, and it's just designed for maximum efficiency. So Apple is like, look, we have our most efficient modem, look, we have our Wi-Fi modem, and look, we have our most efficient 5G modem. Let us put that into the thinnest iPhone ever and just see how consumers react to that. And after that, we will use that year worth of extra data of how the device performs in real life, how it performs in different regions with different carriers, and we'll decide if the Pro models like the iPhone 18 Pro is finally ready to also get maybe a second generation modem built on 4 nanometer. Maybe we would go all crazy and build a 3 nanometer modem while our chips transition to 2 nanometers. So very, very exciting stuff. All of that could also, of course, help Apple really bring down the cost further, because they could potentially increase their orders to TSMC by like another 20, 25, 30% with all that extra stuff. Plus, they can also like reassure TSMC, like, look, we are not gonna drop your old nodes like hot potatoes. For example, you just built like a 6 nanometer factory in the US, and you are making like A16 chips in it for some reason, even though we have only one modem and we probably had enough A16 chips coming still from Taiwan. But you know what? We can make a refined version of our modem in a 6 nanometer factory, and we can tell the US, look, we are supporting domestic manufacturing. So there's so much in how Apple can still even further their relationship with TSMC. It's not just the crazy chips, and the chips are crazy. Again, a 20% increase in GPU is not too much, but don't forget, the M3 chips came out exactly a year ago. When we're talking about huge like 40 to 50% like leaps from like the RTX 4000 series to what will be the RTX 5000 series, that change is happening over more than 2 years, right? When was the launch of RTX 4000 actually? RTX 4000 wiki. Guys, we have 30 people watching. We have been streaming for over an hour. Small shout out as always to do the YouTube jazz, as we call it here. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment live. I love interacting with you guys. If you really want your message to be read, because sometimes I do get busy in covering actually what is on my screen, make it a super chat. Any small donation goes a long way to support this channel. You can also become a channel member right here in YouTube, or a supporter over on Patreon. So many ways in which you can engage with the community, become part of the community, agree with me, disagree with me, have some small debates. Yeah, there's so much. So GeForce 4000. 40 came out in October 12, 2022. So at this point, it's over 2 years old. We had a small super refresh. When you actually look, the transistor count, even on AD102, is below how large Apple's M3 Max and M4 Max chips are. So Apple is really going for very expensive solutions, because putting like 90 to 100 billion transistors on a chip really costs a lot of money. You have like potential problems with yields and stuff like that. So Nvidia, definitely a very advanced company, very, very crucial when it comes to pushing ray tracing technology, AI accelerators, just good GPUs in general. But I would argue Apple is far, far more ambitious, because they have to make chips that power an entire product with its operating system, games, productivity apps, AI stuff, all that jazz, basically. Onichan, by the way, when you say you think the M4 Ultra will be the 4090, in one sense compute like teraflops? No, not in teraflops, and that is because I don't think the M4 Ultra will have dual issue FP32. So, but I think in most compute regards, it will be the RTX 4090. Again, don't forget, the RTX 4090 released in 2022. And RTX 5000 will still be, what is funny, it will be built on pretty much the same node, basically a small uplift from N4 to N4P. And that's because Nvidia wants to keep down pricing. So even if Apple doesn't even fully beat like the 4000, the 5000, even if it goes like 40-50% faster, that will come at a huge power consumption penalty. Even if the architecture itself is more efficient. So Apple will have its advantages. Definitely it will still, like, given how small the Mac Studio is, it probably even makes more sense to compare it against like the 4090 or later the 5090 mobile. And in that regard, it will definitely win. Yeah, but the chip on that level, it's a ridiculous milestone. That's insanely impressive. Yeah, it's all, I would argue both Nvidia and Apple have been very, very impressive chip makers over the last couple of years. Like AMD has been doing some good work with like their smaller SoCs. Intel has completely shit the bed, in my opinion, unfortunately. Like even when they try like very elaborate like system on a chip solutions where they have like N3B CPU tile, and they have a 5 nanometer GPU tile, and they have a 6 nanometer SoC tile, and all that stuff, and it all comes together, and it's like, it's worse than M3 a year later, and now M4 is out. And if you want to scale it further up, well, good luck, right? I mean, I guess if you want like a 32 gigabyte, very small efficiency focused SoC, I guess you could argue at least it's a lot cheaper to get the 32 gigabyte Lunar Lakes thing than it is like an M4 with 32 gigabytes. But like, at that point, get yourself a 24 gigabyte M4 and it will still outperform Lunar Lake in basically every way. To me, it's Apple and Nvidia that really are leading the pack. And when it comes to gaming stuff, purely gaming stuff, I think that especially what AMD does for consoles is also pretty cool. I mean, I am a big PlayStation guy. As I mentioned, I am waiting for my PS4 5 Pro. The amount of times I've needed to update it by BIOS on the Intel 13th gen, oh my god. Don't tell me you have like a K series, a 13th or 14th gen chip. Like, because you could be subject to like potentially like your BIOS is crashing and stuff like that because your chip is actually unstable. Oh, thirsty. I haven't eaten anything today, so that will probably be really, really bad for my stomach. But yeah, when people are saying like, but look, RTX 5000 is 50% faster than 4000. Well, think about it. M3 boosted performance over M2 Pro and Max by like 20%. And by the way, RTX M2 Pro and M2 Max actually came out in the same year as M3 Pro and M3 Max. And now exactly a year later, we have M4 Pro and M4 Max. So if you add those like 20 to 20%, that's 1.44. And now you're looking at pretty much the gap that you would get from an RTX 4000 to an RTX 5000 chip. Yeah, so while I do like to cover some PC stuff here, and we did talk about other stuff today, let us get back to the crazy stuff. Now, we did cover now both the CPU and the GPU performance of the fully enabled M4 Max. We did cover that the M4 Pro is surprisingly good, still at single core, clocked at 4.5 gigahertz. The multi-core actually beats the M3 Max, right, which we saw deliver around 21,000 here. So of course the bin down version will be worse, but that's part of life. I mean, there was a bint M3 Max too, so I guess it's not an unfair comparison. And this is one thing that's also very interesting to me, and that is the GPU. Now, this is the M4 Pro here with 48 gigabytes of memory, so I assume it's a MacBook. Could still be a Mac Mini with 48 gigabytes, but what matters here is that it is an M4 Pro. It is the fully enabled one. And it delivers 111,100 and let's say 11 actually. Let's ignore the 9. Let's say it's a 1. And when you actually compare that to the M3 Pro here that I opened up, in metal it delivered 78,000 points, right? And if we do our math again, let's just be 111 divided by, I'll just type in the number, 78 520 what the why did it that's because it added an extra number, right? So it's a 40% uplift, and that to me, I've already talked that to some people who covered this stuff on Twitter and things like that. This to me suggests that this benchmark really likes, or it still likes, I know from the past that it does, it likes bandwidth. Of course, the M4 Pro gives you 75% more bandwidth than the M3 Pro. So this actually doesn't scale, of course, with the full bandwidth increase, but that's because you only go from like 18 GPU cores to 20. If Apple had maybe given it 24 cores, maybe those cores would have actually been like in need of that much memory, unironically. Like, given the fact that the M3 Pro wasn't even that memory bottlenecked for the GPU, I guess Apple felt the need to add that much more bandwidth because the CPU is also that much more impressive. So yeah, 40% uplift with the GPU from one year to the next. However, don't forget, the M3 Pro was basically just a side grade over the M2 Pro. It had actually one fewer GPU cores, it had less memory bandwidth, but it had a newer architecture, and I believe it was running at higher clock speeds. So it was basically the exact same performance as M2 Pro while consuming less power. So again, we're seeing that in 2 years, you're roughly getting 40% more performance. So this is where we get again to the promise of when RTX 5000 comes out, and it might actually only release early 2025. For one, that gap will be larger than the gap between M3 Pro and M4 Pro. It will not have the same efficiency gains from M2 Pro to M4 Pro because there will not be a node improvement. It will have bandwidth improvements because this will actually use GDDR7, but again, the M4 Pro also uses faster memory than the M2 or M3 Pro, plus it has a larger bus than the M3 Pro. So there's a lot of cool stuff happening in the world of Apple, where some people might say like, oh, I still get so much more performance from an RTX 4080 mobile that is like designed to run at 120 watts, and the fans go off like like a jet engine. Yeah, that to me is not very appealing. Now, I do have my Mac mostly plugged in for more performance tasks. For gaming, I tend to just use it on my bed, so I guess here I really benefit from the fact that performance doesn't just drop atrociously when not plugged in, and that the cooling is good enough still for that performance without the fans just going crazy. Yeah, I'm just, that's one thing. I guess I'm just babbling at this point because I'm just so disappointed that in early 2025, from a super premium company like Nvidia, like they couldn't at least make the 5090 and the 5080 built on 3 nanometer. I understand why keeping the 4070, the 5070 and the 5060 on 4 nanometer makes sense, but yeah. It's all this AI bullshit. They just want to have as reliable a supply from TSMC. They want to bring down costs as they go with their multi-die solution and stuff like that. That basically will combine like 2 5090s into one chip. Yeah, I guess I'm trying to show you guys I'm not just an Apple focused guy. I do watch a lot of PC content, even though I don't like them too much. I do even watch like channels like LTT. I do like Hardware Unboxed. I do like Gamers Nexus. So there's plenty of us to talk about. Does it beat M2 Ultra multi-core? Yes, the M4 Pro beats M2 Ultra. We can actually get to that. M2 Ultra. M2 Ultra was already kind of matched by the M3 Max. You could argue maybe the M2 Ultra gave you like 1,000 extra points in like multi-core. But yeah, like the CPU is already not a comparison, right? Even if you take like the highest 2800 results, which is pretty high for M2 chips, to be honest. So yeah, well, according to this one test specifically, we're getting close to 23,000, like in the higher 22,000 range. Meanwhile, M2 Ultra will give you in the higher 21,000 range. Plus, don't forget, a lot of tasks will actually have trouble utilizing as many cores as they are on the M2 Ultra, right? Let's click on even just the highest result. That's 3.7 gigahertz, right? You have 16 P cores, you have 8 E cores, you have 24 cores. A lot of tasks outside of crazy stuff like Cinebench relatively will have trouble leveraging so many cores. And don't forget, those cores exist on 2 different dies. They are connected by a fast UltraFusion interconnect solution, but they're still not on one die. So there is some latency penalties here, some cache usability penalties. So to me, this suggests that in actual multi-core performance, the fully enabled M4 Pro is not going to just be faster in raw performance than the M2 Ultra, but it will actually be easier to leverage, right? So that's a very important thing for developers. I think similar to how having every Mac be 16 gigabytes is very, very amazing for like game developers, especially knowing that it's all unified memory, and that at the very least, if you're looking at M2, right, you're looking at 100 gigabits per second, you're looking at 120 on M4, right? So you can find a base level performance that is really great. And now for the future, if you are trying to like have an LLM workflow or some kind of fluid simulation or something crazy like that, you know that, yeah, the M4 Pro to you does not just give you the raw power of the M2 Ultra, but because it leverages over a lower core count, that performance might actually be more available to you. And once you consider potentially like an M3, an M4 Max, which will be even faster than that, with still fewer cores, right? It's 16 cores versus 24 on the M2 Ultra. And now potentially putting that into a Mac Studio, with all that like super sustained performance, that amazing cooling solution that won't even wrap up half the time, right? That is game changing, right? That is truly game changing. And this is something that I feel a lot of people forget. Like, for example, on PC, one truly game changing thing with Zen 1 was having twice the CPU cores. And those cores, while they were poor in comparison to the high-end Intel cores, you were getting hyper-threading across the board with AMD, right? So especially like Intel's 4-core, 4-thread chips were now compared to like AMD's 8-core, 16-thread parts because of how cheap they often got. That was a game changer. And in my opinion, let's even forget DM2 Ultra. DM2 Ultra isn't even that old, but think about DM1 Ultra, right? DM1 Ultra that actually had poorer scaling than DM2 Ultra, because that was Apple's first Ultra Connect solution, right? That one will perform basically at the level of the binned M4 Pro chip, and it has all that problem leveraging like cache from the other die. So the base M4 Pro will consume way less power, be much more versatile because you can put it into smaller laptops and chips. Yeah? Yeah. Why? So guys, I got basically the shutter to slowly roll out. I have about 10-15 minutes to wrap it up. Our family is going out to the movie theater. So yeah, well, thank you so much for joining. I'm not wrapping it up quite yet, but I just wanted to let you know. If you want to do all the YouTube jazz before, because I will wrap it up then later, with liking the video, subscribing, commenting, sharing, leaving a super chat, leaving a super sticker, becoming a channel member, becoming a Patreon supporter, all of that. If you want to let me know that any of that happened, make it happen now, because I will be gone soon. Yeah, so M1 Ultra, absolutely crazy. The second mod's asking about the base M4. The base M4, you should basically look at the iPad Pro benchmark charts, iOS benchmark charts. We do have slightly lower clock speeds at 4.4 gigahertz rather than 4.5. We are gonna watch The Wild Robot, which is getting really, really good reviews, and the kids really like the trailer. And I liked it too. It looks gorgeous. It's from DreamWorks. So you will get slightly less single core performance, and then multi-core performance. This is actually one thing. Whenever you go to Geekbench, make really sure you know what is being tested, because for some reason every M4 iPad Pro they show here is the binned version. Wait, it has 10 P cores? It has 10 cores? That is weird. Like, the M4 iPad Pro can give you like 14,500. I have no idea why Geekbench is so underperformant. Like, look, this must be a binned version, right? Yeah, you see there's barely a difference between the binned and the non-binned version, and that is not correct. This was probably like some thermally soaked M4. So 14,500 is where you would expect it to get. The leaked results from the Russian YouTubers were actually giving us a further increase of Prince Sonavne. I actually know that they are binned, but apparently this one is not binned at the very top, but it performs kind of like a binned one. So that's what I was surprised. And the max will be able to give you 1,000 points extra still. At least that's what the Russian reviewers showed, where I believe the highest was like 15,600 or something like that. And then Metal 55,000 points about in the M4 iPad Pro. Decent uplift. Basically, you get like the standard uplift from M2 to M3 to M4 if you like normalize for the same core count. Yeah. So nothing crazy, but again, it does make sense. I mean, considering the M4 Max is basically that, right? It's actually less impressive because the M4 has 2 extra efficiency cores versus the M3. The M4 Max has exactly the same core count across the board, but it does have a larger bandwidth improvement, right? While the M4 improves over M3's bandwidth thanks to 7500 megatransfers per second memory by 20%, going from 100 gigabytes per second to 120. The M4 Max improves by 33% by going from 6400 megatransfers per second memory over a 512-bit bus to 8533 memory. So you win some, you lose some. Basically, the M4 is in line with what the M4 Max is doing. It's just the M4 is technically even slightly more impressive because it has actually an increase in cores. But those extra cores are E-cores, so those cores are probably not going to be like redefining how fast like opening an app works on your system. Plus a slightly more slightly higher clocks on the M4 Pro and M4 Max versus the M4. I hope that helps. We talked about Geekbench stuff comparisons here. Again, really poor design layout of the website, but I'm not going to be too bad. You see, like in Quantisize, 61% difference. Half precision 75. I think it means it gets to. No, it's difference 53%, 74%, 61%. So this is how the AI performs roughly. But I also always say Apple doesn't like using only the neural engine. Often they will engage either the CPU with it or the GPU with it. So for all you know, you will probably never run like this, right? Trying to isolate the neural engine. Some tasks might prefer to have the max accelerators from the CPU jump in. Some would prefer the raw power of the GPU. A lot of them will just be very quickly done on the neural engine. Some tasks will be just vastly different if you're coming from a system with less memory and stuff like that. So the actual real world changes will be interesting to see. Aren't NVIDIA working on ARM chips? They are basically utilizing ARM chips. They want to utilize ARM chips for their servers. I'm not quite sure if they're working on their own. They did want to buy at some point ARM, but that was basically stopped by the FTC. So yeah. That is going to be an interesting saga. I know that Microsoft and Amazon and Google even, they all want to like, some even have already ARM's server cores. Some want to make their own, like not even licensing anything other than, of course, ARM's instruction set. So it will be interesting. That is the one thing that like, I just imagine how butthurt Intel is right now, that in the era of just exploding server consumption, right, which was historically a big strength point of Intel, we now have NVIDIA dominating with how many GPUs people are buying. We have AMD building better x86 cores and giving a versatile choice between Zen 5 and Zen 5C. We have companies trying to build their own ARM chips. So not only are they themselves losing market share, but x86, which they make, will be losing market share. And all during the time where their GPU ambitions basically flopped. And they're just about launching Battlemage, their second generation in-house GPU. Well, if you don't want to count like 12 generations or something of iGPUs. Yeah, so Intel is really truly effed if you're trying to take one thing away from this video. So crazy performance levels. uplifts that are in line with, for example, for the neural engine, what we knew already from the A18 Pro, because it is the same 16-core neural engine. It might benefit a little bit from that extra bandwidth, but mostly that advantage comes in once you combine it with the CPU and GPU. Crazy single core results, the first consumer device without any overclocking to hit 4,000 points in Geekbench. Very solid uplifts in multi-core over M3 Max. Gonna be interesting to see what that means potentially for cooling or power consumption. GPU uplifts not as crazy as the CPU, but still nice. Plus there are architectural improvements like the better ray tracing support. On the M4 Pro, you're getting all the architectural changes, plus most of the single core performance and basically most of the multi-core performance that you would need. The real cutoff is with the GPU. However, you can see in scaling, you don't get, at least not in the test that we have seen thus far, you didn't really get like 220K in Geekbench multi-core. So maybe with scaling, the M4 Pro is actually like the best at utilizing all its cores. Maybe the M4 Max falls a little off, maybe needs to downclock its cores a little bit. Again, AI, we already know that. And you saw some comparison to previous generations. I also brought up the Ryzen 9950X. We discussed the RTX 4000 series and how it's going to transition to the 5000 series, what that could mean for some comparisons to Apple. But I will wait, of course, until that comes out. And we did cover Apple's upcoming Wi-Fi 7 modem, which interestingly, of course, would be built on the latest Wi-Fi 7 spec, which I hope would mean support for 320 megahertz bandwidth. And in the future videos, I do want to cover some drama. So if you're interested in that, please comment, please like, do all the YouTube jazz. And that is that the first Android Authority testings for the latest Realme phone showed some really underwhelming Snapdragon 8 Elite results. It isn't happening for some other reviewers. It isn't happening on like OnePlus devices. So I don't think it's a big problem entirely with the 8 Elite, but it could bode poorly for even devices like the Galaxy S25 Ultra, which are not rumored to be getting battery capacity improvements or more efficient displays. So that could really kill its battery life if the 8 Elite is actually that power hungry and that hot. But we'll see. For now, I am wrapping up. Oni-chan reminding me, I need to get ready for the movie theater. Thank you so much for tuning in. This has been an incredible week, streaming 5 days in a row, getting so many new people to watch live, to join the community. Last shout out before I leave, please, if you like what you saw here, comment afterwards. Don't just comment in the live stream, but also on the actual finished video. I keep them as VODs on the channel. They help attract some new people. They help people who come in and cannot watch live. So if you can do that, that would be a big help. And I'll see you guys probably on Sunday. Tomorrow I'll have to get back to my own apartment. So thank you so much for making this an incredible week for myself, for the channel, for the community. I couldn't do that without you. Love you guys so much. Let me know what you would like to see me cover next time. I already gave you some suggestions, and I'll see you then. This is Mark Tech, tuning out. Take care, guys.